Dark Souls 2. Hold on a second. Okay, I see you in the back. Come on now, Dark Souls 2, baby. I love Dark Souls 2. Is it secretly the best game ever made, or some sort of hidden, flawed masterpiece? Well, maybe, but probably not. In fact, in many ways, it is the definitive black sheep of not just the Dark Souls trilogy, but FromSoft's franchise at large. On paper, it's obviously not the best or most refined game. Not from a technical or visual standpoint, at least. Yet, nowadays, it seems that the opinions around Dark Souls 2 has actually shifted for the better, with people in the community becoming more outspoken and willing to celebrate their attachment to it. And I think it can be boiled down to a simple argument. Dark Souls 2 is fun. I know that sounds stupid, all good games are fun, you say. But the simplistic joy I had playing this game in particular is a feeling that I can't seem to shake. That said, I will be making use of the controversial fun, argument, and vibe defense throughout this video. But I also want to give this game credit where it's due when discussing its experimental mechanics, gameplay systems, and narrative, then offer my 2 cents to the discourse surrounding it. A game which I believe shines brilliantly because of its willingness to introduce new concepts and strive for greater heights. This video then is part retrospective and part critique, but most of all, it's a love letter to one of my all-time favorite games, and gives me an outlet to gush about it while allowing room to explore its themes, critically analyze a few elements here and there, and dissect why exactly this game continues to stay with me. This is an exercise for me to voice my thoughts, work through my feelings towards this game, positive and negative, and take you along for the ride while I'm at it. This is why I can't stop thinking about Dark Souls 2.
You, neither born with greatness nor granted it by the fates. What is it you seek? You cannot even say yourself.
I was late to the Dark Souls party. My first proper FromSoft game was Elden Ring back in 2022, which I think many would agree is their magnum opus. Whether it's your favorite is another story. On its release, Elden Ring felt like the grand culmination of FromSoft's work up to that point, and easily ranks as one of the most critically and commercially celebrated games of all time. It wasn't my first Souls-like game. By that point, I had dabbled in others in the genre like Code Vein, meh, Jedi Fallen Order, good, and Nioh 2, goated. I say all this to establish that I'm no FromSoft veteran, which gave me an opportunity to approach the franchise with fresh eyes and form my own perspective on this monolithic series. To some extent, I was aware of the mechanics and difficulties central to Souls-like games through my limited exposure to them. What I wasn't aware of was how excellent and unbeatable that original FromSoft flavor formula was. That special sauce that gets somewhat diluted in other imitations of the genre. Don't worry, Nioh 2, I still love you. Elden Ring didn't just give me a taste of that sweet, sweet FromSoft magic. It slapped me across the face and then proceeded to serve me the whole damn 9-course meal. Needless to say, I was hooked. I considered tackling the games in release order, but I also wanted to play whatever I felt most drawn to. And so my next FromSoft game was Bloodborne, another all-time great and perhaps the most beloved jewel in the franchise's lineup. Demon's Souls Remake was next, which I feel holds its weight as the originator of many of the series' crucial ideas, but it's also so full of gimmicks and quirks that it slowly became off-putting to me over time. Shadow of the Erdtree gave me another 40 hours of glorious Elden Ring combat and exploration. But with that expansion concluded, I felt aimless, empty, hollow even. and I knew the time had come to go back to where it all started. So I went and bought myself a little gift, the Dark Souls trilogy. In August 2024, I set a loose goal for myself to play through the DS trilogy from start to finish. I wanted to sit down with each game and really soak in that first playthrough, and experience firsthand the magical atmosphere that these games were so renowned for, without rushing to get to the next game. And in case you're wondering, don't worry, I played Sekiro after I wrapped up the trilogy, and it might actually be my favorite FromSoft game, but that's a video for another day. Factual statement, Dark Souls 1 is one of the greatest vibes in gaming. Playing through it felt like playing through history, both from a franchise lore standpoint as well as in a meta real-world sense. This is the game, held up by many to be the greatest game of all time. A piece of media that had such a massive impact on the gaming and cultural landscape that more than a decade on, we still live in the shadow cast by its towering legacy. The world is better off with the existence of Dark Souls, a phenomenon that continues to hold its weight and significance to this day. I will save my Dark Souls 1 critique for another time, but nevertheless, even with all the shared knowledge and learned nostalgia, playing through it was one of the most cathartic experiences I've had in gaming. Dark Souls 3, well, has a lot of things going for it. The faster-paced combat is responsive and elegant, the various vistas and art direction is unmatched, and it arguably hosts the majority of the best and most glorious series-defining bosses in the franchise. I can definitely understand why this could be someone's favorite Souls game. That said, I personally feel that its shorter length and the reliance on nostalgia as a more straightforward narrative sequel to DS1, combined with a bigger shift towards level linearity and punishing enemy encounters post-Bloodborne, hampers the overall experience. It's still great, but never truly captures the indescribable magic of the first game that it often calls back to. But you've seen the title of this video. This is a Dark Souls 2 video. The ignored and often ill-regarded middle child, let free to experiment without the firm guiding hand of the franchise's conceptual father, Hidetaka Miyazaki. A game that was bold and brave enough to tweak the formula, to add its own strange and mysterious ingredients to the sauce while no one was looking. And dare I say, it cooked. Maybe not to everybody's liking, but it definitely has some kick to it. The general discourse around DS2 actually brought me close to skipping it entirely, intending to only play the first and third games, since the weirdness and disconnectedness of DS2 is so omnipresent online that it's hard to ignore. But I'm glad that I played the trilogy in release order because it gave me a clearer perspective on the evolution and overall trajectory of the franchise. This lack of information also added to my experience. Unlike Dark Souls 1 and Dark Souls 3, I hadn't consumed as many lore breakdowns and video essays surrounding Dark Souls 2 before playing it, which left me in the dark as to what to expect from the narrative, bosses, and overall game design. For context, I played the Scholar of the First Sin edition of Dark Souls 2, since it was the version bundled with Dark Souls Remastered and Dark Souls 3 The Fire Phase edition in the physical trilogy. I understand that there are several changes between this version and the original release, but I argue that most newcomers are likely to be playing this definitive edition alongside the others in the trilogy anyway. I will also be referencing other games in the series and specific changes between them when I think they are interesting to me or conducive to understanding how they advance or regress certain ideas, mechanics, and themes over the franchise's lifetime. That said, I don't want this to be a Dark Souls 2 is bad because it isn't Dark Souls 1 video. I want this to be a let's look at what Dark Souls 2 achieved and celebrate its wins, and also look at some of its pitfalls as a game in the franchise. Nothing exists in a vacuum, and as a sequel, it is only fair to ascertain how it holds up as an individual game as well as its place and value in the overall conversation about the IP. These are games that exist in constant relation to each other, especially because they are all still actively played to this day, and I want to be able to lean on that dialogue in my analysis. I also want to clarify that I am a pretty casual enjoyer of these games. I generally focus on that first initial playthrough and try to get as much out of the game as I can, and then I go back to replay it once or twice on New Game or New Game Plus. That is to say, I'm not some skilled challenge runner or build maker, nor do I have thousands of hours logged. I tend to carefully pick games, play them with some guidance, complete the main story, and move on when I'm satisfied or feel like I've got what I wanted out of the experience. This way of consuming games really informs my perspective and feelings, so please excuse me if it seems I'm not playing optimally. I assure you I am trying my best to enjoy myself. Let's start at the beginning with the opening cinematic of the game. Yeah, it's kinda shit. This introduction leaves a pretty bad first impression, especially if you're playing this game straight off from DS1. I wouldn't blame people for being worried or turned off so instantly. The nature of this first cutscene feels so blatantly expository that you forget you're even in a Dark Souls game. That's not to say the content or the ideas behind it are necessarily bad. In fact, it introduces the dreamlike quality that permeates the game's vibe, and overtly describes the central theme of the undead curse, forgetting who you are and slowly becoming nothing. But that's the problem with it. It's overt, on the nose. The way that it's shot feels a bit too edgy and self-serious, with the moody, ominous visuals and strange music choice. It feels more like a CG teaser trailer for a generic dark fantasy game, and fails to demonstrate the esoteric storytelling that made the original's intro so captivating. Instead of showing, it chooses to tell us instead, which is then compounded by the first in-engine cutscene with the old firekeepers, who hand you a human effigy and proceed to explain things even more. Explaining things, in a Dark Souls game, we're not even 5 minutes into booting it up. Please stop talking and let me play the game. You'll lose your souls, all of them, over and over again. Alright buddy, if you say so. Also, the letterboxing of every in-game cutscene to make them seem more cinematic looks really awful, and serves as a constant distraction that immediately ruins what could be visually interesting cinematography. I hate it. Look, I know this is meant to be a more positive Dark Souls 2 video, and it will be, I promise. But these initial impressions were definitely jarring, lacking the deliberate aesthetic and restrained sensibilities of both DS1 and DS3's introductions. I feel that it is important to critique this opening cinematic because it lays the groundwork for what's to come. It preempts the player and lets them tune into what vibe to expect going forward, immediately signaling, for better or for worse, that this game is headed in a different direction. Fortunately, this major misfire slowly fades into a minor fumble overall, one that doesn't really rear its head again as the game continues on and more confidently finds its footing. With that strange introduction done, we actually get to play the game and make our character. Now we're talking. For this playthrough, meet Sir Schwong. Don't forget to go on Reddit and search up the best starting class as well as best starting gift, as well as whether I can change my character's body type later on in case I don't like the fit. And with that, we're off into the things betwixt. In my opinion, the single word that defines the atmosphere of Miyazaki's Soulsborne games is oppressive. When I think about my first playthroughs of Demon's Souls, Dark Souls 1, Dark Souls 3 and Bloodborne, that is the first word, thought and feeling that comes to mind. The worlds you enter are immediately scary and unforgiving. Of course, just because they are oppressive doesn't mean that they are unfair or frustrating or miserable. Okay, Demon's Souls is kinda miserable, but that's arguably its charm. The tone of these games is sustained by a core experience that revolves around brutal combat against horrifying, grotesque monsters, labyrinthian exploration through dark gothic mazes in the form of abandoned castles and misty forests that fold upon themselves, with a narrative typically set in a dead or dying world beset by plague or demons. Its oppressiveness is paradoxically cathartic. It is beautiful, it's immersive, it's memorable, it's Dark Souls. This oppressiveness is such a significant part of the FromSoft experience that you come to expect it at every corner. You expect to be punished, you expect to get ganked, you expect to get lost. I strongly agree with the sentiment that the Souls games are quote-unquote comfy games, and it achieves this by embodying the expectation of struggle that you sign up for. Struggling to navigate a catacomb, struggling to break through a tough boss, struggling to do platforming sections because what the hell is this jump button setup? Oops, you just lost all your souls again. It is the social contract you sign with the game when you insert the disc and pick up the controller. That's why it's all the more surprising when you pass through the things betwixt and it feels almost serene as you wade through the tall grass, light beaming down from a large crack overhead. It's quiet and peaceful as you make your way to the house of the old firekeepers. Here you bathe in the warmth of the hearth and the presence of others in a lived-in home, uncharacteristic for these games. You press on, lighting torches along the way, teaching you a mechanic that you will continue to use to bring light to Drang Lake. The hollow trees you move through have a vibe reminiscent of the stillness of Ash Lake, especially when you stare out at the pillars across the underground cavern. Finished with this tutorial area, you squeeze through a rocky passage at the end of the path, winding through stone and moss, expecting to be deposited in some dire graveyard or ruined shrine. But then you see it, a golden light piercing through the crags and illuminating the wall ahead. You make a turn, and the claustrophobic path opens up into glorious sunlight, revealing the desolate yet hauntingly beautiful seaside town of Majula. What can I say? Majula is the shit. Unlike the vertical, layered, spiraling design of the firelink shrines in DS1 and 3, Majula is open and flat, dotted with dilapidated houses and soothing the player with a sense of reprieve through the sound of waves crashing far below the cliff face. The gloomy stony ruins of Dark Souls 1's Firelink and the dreary candlelit corridors of Dark Souls 3's Firelink are nowhere to be found. Instead, we get a languishing settlement that stretches out under the sun, with familiar buildings and statues built by human hands and eaten away at by the elements, but not so unlivable that you couldn't invite other wary adventurers and merchants back here to find a place to call home. And that's exactly what we do. Wandering around Majula, we meet Moglin the Armorer, Xiaoqua the Cat, Soldan the Crestfallen Warrior, and of course, the Emerald Herald, who, upon our arrival, ask us simply, "Are you the next monarch?" Majula immediately captures the intrinsic quiet beauty of Dark Souls 2, and by extension the wider world of Drang Lake. There's a dramatic shift away from the oppressive nature of the First Flame and its unending cycle that consumes Lodran, as both the design and narrative of the game leans into a budding sense of adventure, a human-led calling to break free from the undead curse. Even the bonfire at Majula is called the Far Flame, a peaceful place far from the turmoil and machinations of gods and lords of cinder and fire-linking rituals. You, the bearer of the curse, are just another lost soul who has found yourself in Drang Lake. The Emerald Herald sets you forth with a goal, as she has with many before you in this foreign land. Grow strong with souls, become a worthy king, and lead a frail and listless world. A world where a lack of purpose is seen as a fate worse than death. After all, it seems that in many ways, dying is easy, living is harder. Let's take a break from analyzing the vibes of Dark Souls 2 and talk a bit about its gameplay. And you can't have a video essay about Dark Souls 2 without talking about adaptability. What can be said about this that hasn't already been said? The bane of every player to have ever rolled in any Souls game. Adaptability is a primary attribute that can be leveled with Souls and directly impacts your agility stat, which increases the speed at which you swap weapons, block, use your Estus and other consumables, but most importantly and controversially, agility impacts the number of invincibility frames you get during your roll. For example, the equivalent of a DS1 medium roll is 96 agility, which gives you 11 iframes, but you start DS2 with 86 agility. So you tend to get caught out by attacks in the early game that you feel like you should have easily dodged, making your roll feel awkward and clunky to use. This decision to have adaptability affect the effectiveness of your roll is definitely strange. It impacts the early game, but in the grand scheme of DS2's increased soul levels, it barely factors into the gameplay once you pass the first couple areas. I personally dump souls into adaptability to get to 96 agility as soon as possible to get a comfortable roll, before it becomes something I never think about again. I agree that this is arguably pointless, to artificially create an inconvenience in a gameplay that can be so easily made redundant. But in trying to understand DS2's more methodical and slower paced game design, I have a singular argument to defend the inclusion of this mechanic. Quick tangent, like I said before, the way I play these games are semi-blind, or generally a somewhat guided experience. If I'm given a yes or no prompt or asked to give an item to somebody, I will do a quick search to see whether it is the right thing to do in case it soft locks me out of content I really want to see. The obtuseness of the Souls games is a big part of their charm, and they lend themselves to great replayability, especially if you want to see every NPC questline and every possible ending. But for me, I like to personally approach games as if my first playthrough would be my only playthrough. In my opinion, that initial experience is unbeatable and can never be captured again. And while some magic is lost in knowing what decisions can be made and how they affect the characters and world, the completionist in me still wants to get as full of an experience as possible through that unforgettable first run of a game. This approach also means I do quick cursory searches about soft caps and stat priorities, as well as what general weapons tend to be popular for what sort of builds. Because of this, I understood the need to level adaptability early in order to get a decent enough roll to bring me through the game. It is jarring, I will admit it, especially in those opening hours you spend getting roll catch by basic enemies. Yet, on the upside, I feel that the nerfed roll forced me to actually engage with the enemy attack pattern more and learn their telegraphs, rather than just rolling through and stun locking the enemy with my weapon. This fits the slower movement and flow of DS2's combat, and is compounded by another new mechanic that is similarly vital in the early game, before taking a backseat later, the Lifegem system. In DS1, you started the game with 5 Estus flasks that would refill when you rested at a bonfire. These healed a decent amount of your health instantly after a short animation. And you could also kindle bonfires to give you more flasks when you rested them, from 10 to 15 to eventually 20. This mechanic felt pretty generous and made it so you were never really short on flasks, and you could easily tank hits from bosses only to heal up with a couple flasks without ever worrying about running out. In DS2, you instead start with a single Estus flask that still refills at a bonfire, while also introducing an additional healing system with life gems. These life gems will be consumables that trigger a healing over time effect, and serve as your main source of healing in the early game, when your very limited Estus flasks would quickly and inevitably run out. I found that the gradual healing provided by the life gems forced me to play more defensively, to back away and strafe out enemy attacks so that I could heal enough to re-engage. This combined with the lack of iframes in the role led to more careful and tactical gameplay, where you would deplete your Estus flasks, which also heals you over time rather than instantly like in Dark Souls 1, and then continue slogging through the level with whatever life gems you've looted or previously purchased. This life gem system also made its way into Sekiro with the pallets, which serve as a heal over time consumable that you typically use after your replenishable gourds run out. But Big Shuang, you object. You can farm souls and buy an unlimited amount of life gems, and then you never have to worry about healing again. While it's true that you can simply buy life gems, I feel like its inferior healing effect also coincides with you finding more Estus flask shards to increase the number of uses, as well as bone shards to increase the efficacy of each flask. There is a deliberate yet gentle move away from life gem reliance and a refocusing on the flask system as the game goes on. A smooth progression of power that you've actually earned through exploration of each level, since you can get a total of 12 flasks and all the way up to a +5 in effectiveness in your first run. This actually goes hand in hand with the introduction of the petrified statues and the fragrant branches of yore that you can use to get past them. A lot of times these statues are placed in obvious spots along the main path, blocking the door or entrance, encouraging you to note them down and come back later once you've collected another fragrant branch, a resource that feels genuinely limited and precious. This creates a desire to backtrack to previous areas, carefully decide which statue to unpetrify, and see what secrets lay behind them, typically rewarding your exploration with palpable power increases, like weapons, spells, and of course, Estus shards. I really enjoy how this whole system organically comes together. And while I understand some players might just bypass all of it by hoarding life gems, I feel that the game lays out a clear and intended way of engaging with its mechanics, a system which still allows you to crack open a couple life gems if you really want to, but gradually shifts the focus back onto a more fleshed out Estus flask that actually grows alongside you, rather than giving you 5 or 10 out of the gate and calling it a day. That feeling of returning from the Lost Bastille after a grueling journey, giving the Emerald Herald an Estus shard and getting an additional flask to heal with, and then turning around to the bonfire and burning a bone shard you found behind a petrified statue to get a +2 next to the little icon. It's unbeatable, man, and really reinforces that sense of adventure and reward. Speaking of adventure, let's leave the quiet splendor of Majula and get this ugly sack of meat back on the road. As the bearer of the curse, your journey through Drang Lake is a reckless pursuit of purpose, a cathartic romp through crumbling citadels and fallen kingdoms. Every bit of dialogue hints at a history that has long passed. There is a sense of temporal scale here. We are so far removed from the events of Dark Souls 1 and the linking of the flame by the chosen undead, that all the names of key figures have been forgotten by time. Centuries, even millennia have come and gone, and the world has continued marching forward to the rhythm of the fire being linked. Until now, where the king of Drang Lake, King Vendrick, has refused to link the fire, instead going hollow himself and leaving the throne of Want empty. Because of his actions, the world has essentially stopped. Your character has been drawn here like a moth to a flame, with no recollection of who you are and a single goal: become the true monarch. Not link the flame, not let the flame die. Your goal is to simply become great. In search of power, you will venture out of the safety of Majula again and again to brave the beautiful and hostile locales of Drang Lake. From the flooded ruins of Hyde's Tower of Flame, to the high walls of the Lost Bastille, to the haunting serenity of the Shrine of Amana, to the spiraling towers of the Dragon Eyrie. The locations of DS2 are diverse and atmospheric, and while the level design isn't always on par with the winding interconnectedness of Lordran, it's clear that DS2 is aiming for a different type of feel. The levels are relatively straightforward and visually engaging, each with their own aesthetic that sort of gives the exploration an arcadey feel. Even choosing which bonfire to walk to from Majula feels like a classic level selection screen, with little thumbnails and descriptions and bonfire checkpoints clearly displayed. Admittedly, some of the connections lack sense when physically traveling through the world, like the infamous elevator ride from the Earthen Peak into the Iron Keep's volcanic terrain. While oddities like this can really ruin the immersion, I'll argue that the haphazard dreamlike quality of hopping between polar opposite locations also further reinforces the amnesiac nature of Drangleic that is central to DS2. While it would have been interesting to have a Lodron-esque map that encouraged backtracking through its multiple layers, I'm glad that they went with a different style, where the fast travel unlocked from the beginning is both convenient and suited for the gameplay, as there are so many different locations to zip through. Quantity doesn't always beat quality, of course, and DS1's level design is still a genius masterstroke, but DS2's less measured approach scratched a different gamer itch in my brain. If I had to compare it, it would be like looking at a grand, detailed Gothic painting versus a vibrant, expressionist landscape. There is a place in art for both. The marriage of environmental storytelling and lore is still as present here as it is in DS1. The most beautiful and understated part of Dark Souls 2's story is how much it isn't a straight sequel to the events of Dark Souls 1. It is disconnected and distant, almost like we're seeing the echoes reverberate from the actions of the chosen undead that have indirectly shaped the world. As Laddersmith Gilligan in Majula tells you, kingdoms have risen and fallen countless times on this very spot. The game's narrative quickly abandons the obviousness of its opening cinematic and instead challenges you to make these connections yourself, to let things simmer and ruminate in your brain as you defeat weirdly named bosses, delve into item descriptions, and take in the environments around you in classic FromSoft style. I'll argue that this storytelling is actually at its most unique here out of the trilogy, since everything is unfamiliar yet uncannily recognizable, from the Anor Londo architecture of Hyde, to the current holders of the Lord Souls and their respective personalities, to the presence of Aldia reminiscent of the primordial serpents, to the shambling Hollow King Vendrick, echoing the shade of the great Gwyn himself. It's like poetry, it rhymes. Just like poetry, you have to consider meter and word choice and internal rhyme, how ideas mirror each other and show up in transformed ways. DS2 is an organic sequel and sets itself apart through the passage of time, where the events of DS1 are ancient history, with the names fading into myth. This distance forces you to consider the changes in the world, the evolving cultures, and the sad beauty of places long past their prime. The idea of kingdoms rising and falling are reflected in the characters, some even physically stranded from the original time like Strayed of Elaphus, hailing from an ancient country of technology and magic where Drangleic now stands. This displacement is engaging in its vagueness and doesn't strong-arm the player into lore conclusions, allowing you to apply your own gathered knowledge. DS2 feels like poetry worth studying, a sequel that respects your intelligence as a player and your ability to connect the dots. I was left alone and given space to be curious about the foundations of the world, of the first sin, of how Drangleic came to be, and how far removed we are from the monumental linking of the first flame, rather than literally having Anor Londo and Irithril like in Dark Souls 3. To be honest, the whole idea of this video initially came about while playing through DS3 for the first time, during which I found myself constantly thinking about DS2 and the feelings I had playing it. This thought continued to gnaw at me and wouldn't go away even as I entered the Ringed City. Sure, there's a lot about DS3 to like its refined combat sandbox, memorable bosses, and general replayability. But I often found myself less immersed in the world, and disappointed that the game decided to move away from many of the ideas introduced in DS2, especially the more subtle approach to storytelling and handling of the wider lore. The clear-cut references to the first game in DS3 can be fun and nostalgic and make some canonical sense, but just as I disliked the opening of Dark Souls 2 and its cringy exposition, inclusions like Anor Londo and the second Firelink Shrine feel too jarring and on the nose. Like the game doesn't trust you to infer things on your own and needs to hold your attention captive with callbacks by lifting them wholesale. Worse than this, its willingness to be so direct ends up diminishing the uniqueness that defines the first and second games. Even Gwyn, the first Lord of Cinder, whose name is seemingly forgotten by the events of DS2 and is only known by his legendary deeds, is mentioned and discussed by name in DS3, which kinda defeats the whole point of DS2's story and the mysteries surrounding the first sin. Narratively, this closeness to DS1 is explained by the collapsing of time upon itself as the world reaches its end, merging locations and events and characters across the trilogy. But it is undoubtedly much more heavy-handed in its connection to the events of DS1, making the fan service element of its plot very hard to ignore while playing through it. In this case, the poetry just rhymes and that's it. There isn't as much room for interpretation with different readings, and the game is clearly designed to be a straight-up sequel to the first game, borrowing heavily from the aesthetics and ideas of that original classic. Don't get me wrong, I think DS3's story is cool in its own way, but I feel the execution of it felt a little bland and uninspired. When pitting DS2 and DS3 against each other narratively, I definitely prefer how Dark Souls 2 handled itself both as a story and a sequel, exercising a restraint and wonder reminiscent of the first game. It understands which ideas to take from Dark Souls 1 and delve deeper through both story and gameplay. Even the mechanic of going hollow is expanded and given further emphasis in DS2, with the human obsession to overcome the undead curse being the central thread of the game's narrative. In Dark Souls 1, being hollow is your default state, which makes sense as the chosen undead. You can use humanities at bonfires to restore your human form, which allows you to summon other players and NPCs for co-op, and also invade or be invaded by other players. This go round, you begin the game in human form, and every time you die you lose 5% of your maximum health, lowering each time until it hits 50% of your total health bar. During this process, your character model physically deteriorates, with your flesh peeling and bone being exposed under the skin. I really like the detail of this hollowing. After a couple of deaths, you really start to look like a grotesque zombie with your flesh rotting off you and your hair falling off, like a proper undead. And it's made better by the fact that your hollow form actually has different models and changes every time you die, so there's at least a handful of ways to look like an ugly sack of meat. To reverse your hollowing, you can use a human effigy at any time, restoring your lost health bar and your physical form. It's not a huge change, but I love this mechanic, since you're able to decide when you want to reverse your hollowing, and whether you can make do with your shrinking health pool as you progress through a level. You are taught to treat effigies sparingly, which adds another dynamic to player control and agency, and forces you to make decisions like using one before fighting a boss, only to have each encounter and subsequent death chip your maximum health down, and having to decide when you have too little health to give the boss another go, forcing you to consume another human effigy, or simply when your character has gotten too ugly and you're sick of looking at them. I feel that this is the best hollowing mechanic in the series, and it has the greatest sense of ludonarrative harmony. On the lore side, I like that the bear is human first, slowly turning hollow with each death and losing yourself, before consuming a human effigy to remember who you are and pull yourself back to a human form, knowing that you're gonna keep persevering while slowly turning hollow again. It feels personal. On the mechanical side, it's a fair system that is more immediately engaging and reasonable than the Demon's Souls system of playing the majority of the game at 50% maximum health, or 75% with a ring that takes up one of 2 ring slots, or the Dark Souls 3 way when you lose a chunk of your maximum health without really knowing how much. I end up playing most of DS3 unembered and considering that my main health bar. I would often use an ember to bring my maximum health up before a boss, only to die and end up with the same health bar as before, which eventually pushed me to avoid embering altogether and just play the game without engaging with the mechanic. Maybe I'm just bad, I don't know. Basically, in DS3, being ambered and reaching your maximum health is treated as a bonus, while in DS2, being at full health is treated as your base state, with each death narratively and mechanically diminishing it. And I like that. It feels good. It makes sense. We also can't skip over DS2's most lauded gameplay mechanic, bonfire aesthetics. These items can be burnt at a bonfire to increase a specific area by a single new game cycle, respawning bosses and allowing you to reacquire boss souls and unique drops, while offering a new level of challenge without the need to go into New Game Plus. On top of this, New Game Plus cycles also add other random notable stuff like new enemies to boss arenas, changing some chests to mimics, and literally more skeletons in the basement. This world tendency effect feels organic and rewarding, evoking the black and white world tendency of Demon's Souls, where your actions would affect the general difficulty of the enemies as well as causing rare NPCs or items to spawn. Unlike the black and white world tendency, however, bonfire aesthetics simply present themselves as an option, a mechanic that can be completely ignored in your playthrough. By simply existing, they further increase build variety by allowing you to experiment with more weapons and rings, and this feeds into one of DS2's greatest strengths, the vastness of its weapon sandbox and the freedom to create fun and unique builds. DS2's arsenal is vast and often eccentric, with a lot of weapons usually prioritizing fun over function, but its streamlined upgrade system allows you to try out different builds easily without feeling completely locked in once you've picked a weapon. The ability to respec your character at any time feels essential here, while the inclusion of unlimited upgrade materials allows experimentation to feel less punishing than in the other games in the franchise. Things like the introduction of power stancing 2 weapons of the same type, and the satisfying progression to achieving it due to the ridiculous stat requirements. The countless boss or weapons, each with their own fun creative gimmick, and the ability to assign any aspect to any weapon, even boss weapons, empowers you to explore options as you progress through the game. Even the types of magic feel more fleshed out in this game, with the usual sorcery scaling with intelligence, miracles scaling with faith, but hexes scaling with the lesser of the two and pyromancy scaling with the sum of both, each being relatively balanced while still being aesthetically and functionally different. The variety of spells available and the magic system itself allows for even more player expression and feels more naturally integrated into DS2 than in the other games. These elements all combine to form a robust and creative build system, an expansiveness that feels like the spiritual predecessor to the insanity that is Elden Ring. This unrestricted freedom and ability to respect and try a different path is one of DS2's greatest strengths, championing a system that fully leverages customizability to simply make the game more fun. It doesn't punish you for experimenting, and instead greatly complements the diverse and evolving nature of your trek through Drangleic. Speaking of Drangleic, it's always a bit difficult to explore the narratives of FromSoft's games, since their plots are often cryptic and secondary to the moment-to-moment gameplay and exploration. That sidelining of an overt plot filled with exposition and cutscenes for the sake of compelling gameplay is one of the biggest selling points of these games. The solace of not just the atmosphere but the growing player character you build as you struggle through a dying world, with just a glimmer of direction based off a line or two of dialogue such a vibe, and really allows you an agency that traditional cinematic single-player campaigns or epic fantasy character-driven RPGs don't often prioritize. DS2 retains this core identity of exploration and quiet plot progression, but is also propelled by a thematic question that establishes a genuine sense of adventure. You've come to Drangleic to break the curse, but how can you do that? What is your purpose? Why do you even want to do that? Bearers seek less? This simple objective is spurred on by two fronts: the intertwining fates of King Vendrick and his older brother Aldia. The story of these estranged siblings and their individual motivations are the guideposts for the Bearers' journey, and are essential in the player's own understanding of the world and their purpose in it. Vendrick was a great man who refused to link the flame in outward protests, instead sealing himself away and going hollow. Why would he do that, when he had acquired all the power necessary to link the flame, like the chosen undead ages before him? On the other hand, Aldia was once a man whose obsession with unraveling the history of the world led him to weave himself into the fabric of reality and ultimately escape it. Two brothers with different ideologies. Two men who gave up their humanity. When Aldia first explodes from the primal bonfire and jump scares you, rising from the ground as a hulking, twisted amalgamation of trees and flames, he poses you a question. You, neither born with greatness, nor granted it by the fates. What is it that you seek? You cannot even say yourself. I know this is not an uncommon take, but Aldia is my favorite character in the Dark Souls trilogy, and possibly my favorite FromSoft character of all time. His twisted, inhuman appearance, compelling backstory, and curious musings on the world left me immediately seeking lore connections between him and the primordial serpent of Dark Souls 1. How ancient is he? How much is he lying about? What does he truly want? Like Kath and Frampt from Dark Souls 1, Aldia's presence serves to propel the bearer forward with his words. But there is something about his relentless curiosity. The fact that he is almost unfathomable, so obsessed with transcending the undead curse not just for himself but for all of humanity, that he has become something entirely beyond human, now linked to the primordial foundations of the world and genuinely content to continue his research by toying with and influencing your actions as the curse bearer. There is something recognizably human to his behavior and his insatiable curiosity. His megalomaniacal personality is focused on you, not acting as a clear ally or antagonist to your quest. Instead, he is an active observer, interested in your purpose. This dynamic of interpersonal investment between you and Aldia can be said about your relationship with most of the characters in the game. A truly unexpected aspect of DS2 was how attached I ended up being to the NPCs and the individual quest lines. They each build upon the theme of seeking purpose, each trying to discover or rediscover why they have traveled to Drangleic in the first place. There's a certain levity to the stories here, equal parts emotional and absurd. Bernhard of Jugal with his fake moonlight greatsword, Lucatelle of Mira and her journey to find her brother, and Royal Sorcerer Navlan with his Jackal and Hyde desire to kill every other NPC you've grown to care about. Even Strayed of Alaphis, like I mentioned before, a random sorcerer you unpetrify after hundreds of years, drops interesting lore revelations out of nowhere by talking about his displacement in time and the empires that had come before. While it is admittedly a bit annoying to have to summon some of these NPCs for boss fights to progress their quest lines, especially if you prefer playing solo and not relying on NPC allies, doing so does build this battle bond and deeper appreciation for the characters as they move towards their goals alongside you. They also have some unique dialogue from when you walk away from them, usually chastising you for being rude and unpleasant, which I think is totally valid. This feature wasn't present in DS1, and interestingly continues to be absent in all of FromSoft's other games, which I think is strange since it is such a cute little detail that adds flair to the personality of these characters and makes them so much more memorable. The way they are typically excited to speak with you only to be offended when you don't reciprocate makes them feel much more personally invested in your journey through Drangleic, as they gather around the physical and metaphorical hearth of the Far Flame in Majula, setting up shop and taking some space to breathe in its comforting and safe warmth. Characters like Moglin the Armorer sell you more wares as you continue to spend more money, turning from a likable but meek salesman into a greedy, arrogant merchant as you fund a small business. You get to save Rosabeth and give her clothes from your inventory, which she'll thank you for and continue to wear proudly, standing majestically on the hill overlooking Majula. I love the feeling of just talking to Chloanne to buy some upgrade materials, and then getting distracted and walking away, only to be chastised by her and feeling guilty enough to come back only to walk away again. Very realistic. Another underrated element is the number of NPC invaders that show up throughout the game. Not just that, but these red phantoms emote and troll you and act like a human player would, rolling around and emoting on your body when they kill you. Armor Dennis in the Forest of Giants is one great example of that, just taunting you into battle and then juking you. Another memorable one is in the DLC, which we'll get to, where he literally acts as your ally, guiding you around before betraying you at a switch. It's so ridiculous yet impressive how FromSoft managed to quickly communicate their personalities by making them mimic the mode of common player invader archetypes. They also have the quality of life improvement of appearing immediately when the invaded by message comes up, typically inside of you, and when you eliminate them, the invader slain message also comes out immediately like a jump scare, which I thought was quite nice with how responsive delivering that final blow feels. This quickness isn't present in DS3 for whatever reason, nor is the constant invasions from random NPCs. Personally, I found that the NPC invaders, their unique personalities, and fending them off at every random corner of the world made my adventure through Drang Lake just a little bit less lonely. With that said, let's get back to the plot. An increasingly common opinion that you often see online is that DS1 peaks when you arrive at Analondo and beat Ornstein and Smoke, before turning into a bit of a slog with areas like Lost Izalith with its puzzling enemy layout, and the Tomb of the Giants with its tedious navigation. I generally agree with this sentiment, and I struggle to stay excited once I've got through the glorious sun-bathed capital, somewhat dreading what comes next. This mid-game fall-off is an interesting phenomenon in FromSoft's games, especially since the majority of them are more or less split into two distinct halves. In DS1, it's pre-Analondo and post-Analondo. In DS3, it's pre-Irithyll and post-Irithyll. In Sekiro, it's everything up to Ashina Castle when you beat Genichiro, and then after that with the hunt for the Fountainhead incense ingredients. Even Elden Ring faces the same issue, with the journey up to and including Lane Dell being epic and exciting and new, only for it to lose that same momentum as it heads into its second half with Mountaintops of the Giants. That initial shock and awe reveal that you have a whole entire section of the game left to play through is genuinely incredible the first time, but the feeling tends to wear off quicker when you realize the latter portion stops being as impressive and novel as the first 20 hours. Once again, there's nothing like that first magical playthrough when everything is unknown and unexpected. This is where Scholar of the First Sin manages to buck this mid-game fall-off trend. After beating the current holders of the Four Lord Souls and lighting their respective primal bonfires, your journey brings you to the gates of Drang Lake Castle. Interestingly, I find that DS2 gets markedly more fun to play once you've reached Drang Lake Castle. Sure, the transition between the calm, misty shaded woods and the gothic lightning-lit sky of Drang Lake through a random tunnel in the forest is a little jarring. It's no Iron Keep elevator, but it's close. That said, you can't tell me that the shot of Drang Lake Castle framed against the night sky doesn't look sick though. Fighting through the dimly lit castle was a sort of gothic horror feel to it, especially with the perpetual darkness, imposing architecture, moving statues and the golems coming to life. After slowly ascending the castle from the initial gate, you gain audience with Queen Ashandra, who reigns in King Vendrick's absence. There's something cold and cruel about her presence, and characters throughout the game speak of her in fear, hinting that she may be responsible for the desolation of Drang Lake. This is the midpoint of the game, where she calmly beseeches you to seek Vendrick, but you know it's not for any benevolent means. The fight against the Looking Glass Knight is epic, with the rain beating down and the luminescent shine of his armor dancing light off the crackling sky. It's easily one of the most atmospheric bosses in the franchise in my opinion, and feels like a proper trial of combat, determining your worthiness to proceed with your journey. Even better is the next area, the Shrine of Amana. Such a uniquely beautiful and haunting location, and yes, the homing missile sorceresses are a pain in the ass, but the brutal enemy layout is so nicely undercut by the serenity of the surrounding waters that I was happy to keep trudging through the level, carefully eliminating enemies and gathering myself at the havens each little island provided. The Demon of Song is another memorable boss, more so for its creepy body horror design, and the reveal that the beautiful yet unnerving melody you've heard echoing throughout the shrine is actually coming from the mouth of this monstrosity, who has taken residence in a cave and ceaselessly tempts all with its siren song. The following descent into the undead crypt feels almost sacrilegious as you go from sconce to sconce, bringing light to this forgotten subterranean labyrinth. The Finitos stand watch over this dark domain, fitting creations of the Gravelord Nido, and they warn you not to disturb the dead and respect the king's will. You descend deeper and deeper, and eventually come face to face with Velstad, the right hand of the king, corrupted by the darkness of the crypt. You put this great knight down and press onwards. You know what lies at the bottom of this tomb. You creep down the stairs into a square room enveloped in darkness. The sound of metal being dragged along the floor reverberates as your eyes adjust to the pitch black, revealing the lumbering, looming form of King Vendrick, nothing but a gaunt hollow shambling aimlessly in the dark. He does not attack you, and instead roams around with his mind completely gone. There is something so understated and tragic about this discovery. The feeling is haunting and empty. This once great man reduced to nothing by the curse. The very same curse you're striving to overcome. All of this really comes together in the 3 expansions released for the game, collectively referred to as the Lost Crowns DLC, which I believe form the best and most well-rounded section of the entire DS2 experience. The Crown of the Sunken King, the Crown of the Old Iron King, and the Crown of the Ivory King are some of the best DLC experiences FromSoft have concocted so far, and that's saying something with the repertoire and caliber of all the expansions. Together they organically create a much needed third act, and represents the peak of Dark Souls 2 world design, boss design, and environmental storytelling. We enter the memory of the king and speak with Vendrick, who sets us on a treasure hunt with the same goal in mind since he first arrived in Majula: grow stronger and become a true king. This final gauntlet of levels add not just lore implications and a game-changing objective, but 3 of the most visually captivating, best designed areas in any Souls game: Shulva, Sanctum City, Broom Tower, and Frozen Maleum Lois. These 3 locations are full, densely packed levels, each with their own unique visuals and atmosphere, enemy variety, as well as incorporating central and defining exploratory mechanics, all culminating in some of the most challenging and memorable boss battles in the entire series. In Dark Souls 1's DLC, Artorias of the Abyss, you travel backwards in time to Ulusil, an ancient kingdom you hear about in the base game, to witness firsthand its destruction. The seemingly small side quest turns out to be history-altering, as the chosen undead faces off against Artorias, one of Gwyn's 4 knights, and Manus, the father of the Abyss, obliterating him to prevent the spread of dark. In the Lost Crowns DLC, you instead visit 3 forgotten kingdoms in their ruined state long after their collapse, and face the literal and metaphorical ghosts that still linger there, grounding the narrative in the present and solidifying the Lost Crowns as treasures to be uncovered. This preserves the story's forward momentum as it hurtles towards the climax, leveraging that classic DS2 sense of adventure by giving us one last goal to become the strongest. First, we set foot into Shulva, Sanctum City, an underground necropolis filled with unbelievably large pyramids and monuments. It's your classic Indiana Jones Tomb Raider ancient underground city, and that first impression when you turn the corner reminds me a bit of the stone coffin fissure in Shadow of the Erd Tree, revealing an unfathomably large subterranean complex that sits abandoned and haunted. Hidden crystals to lift and lower platforms serve as the central exploration mechanic here, and the city of Shulva is a complex and challenging environment to navigate, but not necessarily unfair. Unlike the rest of the game, I decided to play the DLCs completely blind and with no prior knowledge because I was having so much fun up to this point. I really wanted to delve deep and soak up the atmosphere. The haunted halls of Shulva are genuinely terrifying to explore, with its dark corners, traps, and illusory walls galore. It's only fitting that one of the 3 bosses in this DLC are the infamous Gank Squad, a trio of looters and pillagers who have found themselves deep in the bowels of this ancient city, searching for treasure in the Cave of the Dead. This battle isn't much to write home about though, and it could have just been an email, to be honest. Come on guys, break it up. As we descend even deeper into the ruins of Shulva, we face Alana, the Squalid Queen, a menacing sorceress who guards the Dragon Sanctum and wields dark magic against us. Turns out the story of the crowns is also the story of the Children of Dark. In your journey to collect the crowns, you encounter the Daughters of Manus, the progenitor of the Abyss that you face in DS1's DLC. When the chosen undead defeated Manus, his immense soul split into multiple fragments, all manifesting an aspect of his personality. These shards of Manus are all drawn to power in one way or another, with the first one we encounter, Alana, representing his wrath. I love the storytelling of these Crown DLCs, essentially becoming the spiritual and narrative sequel to the Artorias of the Abyss DLC from DS1, further exploring the aftermath of Manus' actions and how his influence went on to corrupt the world beyond his death in Ulusil. It is so satisfying drawing the connections back to the events of DS1, and I'll admit it here at the risk of sounding really dumb, but I only put together that Nashandra was also a shard of Manus after collecting all the crowns. To be fair, at this point they've hinted at her true origins, but it was through unraveling each of the three daughters' stories and how they tied in with the creation of the crowns and the powerful individuals that wore them, that I finally made that connection in Nashandra's relationship with King Vendrick. Anyway, turns out Alana is protecting a cataclysmic threat in the form of the slumbering dragon Sin, a genuine descendant of the ancient dragons, the real deal, unlike Aldia's massive artificial dragon that sat atop the dragon shrine. It's Sin's poison that has completely destroyed Shalva. This to me is a proper epic dragon fight, easily outclassing Black Dragon Calamite from DS1, and sets a good framework for Medea in DS3 and Placidusax and Bale in Elden Ring. Sin is nowhere near as complicated a boss as his later dragon cousins would end up being, but the novelty of watching him fly around the area, poison clouds shrouding the air above us, before swooping to dive bomb you is visual peak. Unfortunately, we have to put this beautiful beast down and claim the crown of the Sunken King, who we never get to see. Well, if Shalva is hell underground, Broom Tower is hell in the sky. Just like Shalva, the first glimpse of the tower is jaw-dropping. An ashen wasteland stretching endlessly, large crumbling towers piercing the sky and uncommittedly connected to each other by massive chains. This is one of my favorite locations in the entire franchise, based purely on its beauty. Instead of the claustrophobic corridors of the Sanctum City, we are now high above the ground, traipsing from tower to tower while destroying mysterious glowing statues of ash. The central structure, with its multiple ascending and descending lifts, acts as a hub and allows you to explore the tower in whichever order you feel like. I feel that this is where DS2's level design is at its strongest. Wandering often, accidentally coming across a bunch of katana-wielding berserkers, only to climb the spiraling stairs leading to an ominously glowing set of samurai armor. It is such an unexpected moment of discovery. Touching the sword and entering the memory of the Old Iron King sets us on a path to clash swords with Sir Lon, one of the Old Iron King's most decorated warriors. This ranks as one of the top 3 worst boss runbacks in all of the Souls games, but the battle against Sir Lon really makes up for it. It plays out like a dance, where his hits can immediately kill you. Learning how to read and sidestep his attacks is awesome, and the combat here feels weighty and deliberate, and greatly rewards patience. It kinda has a Sekiro vibe to it. If you go through the whole battle without getting hit, he takes his katana and commits seppuku. What a fucking Chad. Journeying further down into the foundations of Broom Tower, we find a mysterious arena surrounded by more statues. This is the tomb of the Fume Knight. His actual name is Raim, and he served King Vendrick alongside Velstadt, the two great men known as the left and right arms of the king, before rebelling against Vendrick, being defeated by Velstadt, exiled from Drang Lake, and branded a traitor. Rain came to the Broom Tower in search of strength. In the ruins he found Nadalia, another daughter of Manus, the shard that represents loneliness. Nadalia herself had come to this kingdom long ago in search of a great king, only to find nothing but ruins and succumbing to her isolation, choosing instead to become one with the tower and stand guard over this ashen graveyard. Raim comes across her and is taken in by her presence, and becomes the Fume Knight, his blade possessed by the Bride of Ash, and the two seemingly satisfied to keep each other company. Did I mention that this boss is sick as hell? Even better, if you wear Velstadt's helmet into Raim's arena, he will immediately enter his second phase. Whether it's because of his blinding resentment towards Velstadt, or his fury at the player for killing Velstadt and stealing his vengeance, or that Velstadt's defeat means we are a true threat that he needs to go full force with. This little detail adds so much to the Fume Knight's personality and the rivalry he had with the King's Aegis. The battle itself is a beautiful duel, tough but fair in its mechanics, and carries a similar weight to Gwyn and Slave Knight Gale. There is an immense sadness to these charred remains, driven to obsession, their burning swords clashing against yours in an arena of ash at the end of the world. Just like those who came before and those who will come after, you put Raim down, ending the Fume Knight and prying the crown of the Old Iron King from Nadalia's ashen corpse. Of course, we've saved the best for last.
Turn back. The old chaos hungers still.
Oh, chills, man. The visual of the old chaos bursting through the gate with its tendrils of fire, almost fracturing its prison, only to be barely held back by the ice. You immediately feel something at work here, and you're stepping into some sort of exclusion zone that you've been warned not to trespass. You feel the gravity of the situation. It's atmospheric. Frozen Allium Lois itself is engulfed in a persistent, blinding snowstorm which affects your visibility and serves as a main exploratory mechanic for this area. You trek through its winding ramparts and climb its towers, seeking a way to gain audience with a voice at the cathedral. The snow on your outfit builds as you roll around and slowly melts off when you stand still, another nice little detail. Eventually, you find the Eye of the Oracle and the snowstorm ceases, revealing the walled city in its entirety. It is grand and ethereal, blanketed in snow and clearly abandoned, but not exactly in a state of disarray. Unlike the desolate Shalva and crumbling Broom Tower, Allium Lois seems habitable. So what exactly is going on here? Fighting Alva, the king's pet, who is no longer invisible when you wield the Eye of the Oracle, gains you access to the cathedral, where we find the source of the voice warning us to stay away from the city. Elsana, another child of dark, representing fear and sorrow. She is the one holding back the chaos, loyal to the Ivory King who vanished when he felt his soul degrading. She pleads with you to use your strength to save the king and his knights further below. I love the subversion that Elsana represents. She is a fragment of the abyss, fated to be a creature of the dark, but being by the side of the Ivory King has allowed her to become her own person, and she instead chooses to protect the world. The reveal of the old chaos roiling and burning under the cathedral as you plummet down into its depths is such an epic moment, one of the greatest in the franchise. This is what remains of Lost Izalith and the bed of chaos, an unending sea of primordial fire that has continued to spew forth since the Witch of Izalith twisted her own lord's soul. Even more sick than this reveals the Ivory King boss battle itself. By your side in this battle are the Allium Lois knights that you saved throughout your journey in the city. When you first land on the platform, portals appear surrounding the arena, and corrupted Allium Lois knights pour out. One by one you put them down as your companions run over and freeze the portals they came out from. But then a giant portal shoots up at the end of the arena. This is peak, man. What a fucking entrance. The knights now rally to you and prepare to do battle against the king, who has been completely corrupted by the chaos. This is hands down the best boss battle in DS2, and one of the trilogy's highlights. The lead up, the setting, the mechanics, the team up, the boss himself, it's perfection. Okay, I'll talk about Frigid Outskirts. Yes, this place sucks, it's unrewarding, it's annoying to navigate, and has some of the worst enemies in any FromSoft game in the form of the fucking reindeers. And honestly, I missed this area completely on my first run through the Crown of the Ivory King because I didn't think to sit in the coffin and slide off the damn map. But I did find one way to somewhat enjoy it. Right when you spawn in, there are 3 summon signs on the ground. The head of Vengarl, Abyss Fever, and Manhunter O'Hara. Exploring the frigid outskirts with these 3 NPCs feels like you're going on a little adventure with a fully formed party of 4. You, a hunter, a mage, and a warrior. 2 DPS, a healer, and a tank. Warriors of Light type shit. You march on blindly through the perpetual snowstorm, bursting down the stupid reindeers as they materialize out of the blizzard, while Vanguard tanks the hits like a champ. I know this is an intended mechanic to summon allies here, specifically human players to help you through the area by playing co-op, like in the Cave of the Dead against the Gang Squad and the Iron Passage against the Blue Smelter Demon. So I'm glad Scholar of the First Sin allows us to summon these NPC cooperators instead. The boss battle at the end against the 2 cats is nothing special, but the journey through the outskirts with my boys Vango, Fever, and O'Hara ended up being one of the most memorable moments in the game for me just by engaging with this mechanic. And with that, the DLCs are complete. The 3 Daughters of Manus given closure, and the Lost Crowns now in our possession. The only thing left to do is deliver our treasures to King Vendrick and get stronger. This is the climax of the game. You bring the Lost Crowns back to King Vendrick in the dream, alongside his own crown that you can find hidden behind the door in the Shrine of Amana, that can only be accessed in human form. He uses their combined power to bless you, ensuring you can never go hollow as long as you wear the crown. With this newfound strength from the King's Ring, you are ready to open the way to the Throne of Want and link the fire if you so choose. The Throne of Want itself seems to be some sort of portal to the First Flame, the final barrier to the fire linking ritual that can only be accessed with the necessary items and title. Even the Throne of Want hits different as a visual motif. Rather than a bonfire like in DS1, the flame has been transfigured into a physical stone seat, sealed in a tomb-like structure. It embodies the desire, the greed, the lust for power, and the isolation that has beckoned the strong since the flame was first linked. This is the true seat of kings. As expected, Nashandra appears before you in her true monstrous form. After all, she is a shard of Manus, described as the littlest of her siblings, and she craves absolute power. You've accumulated a great number of souls, becoming a container for unbelievable strength, and Nashandra is here to take it from you. Or perhaps turn you into a hollow puppet of the dark so you can sit the throne and usher in an age of dark, the same darkness Vendrick sacrificed himself to stop. Of course, we refuse to submit to the Child of Dark, instead destroying her completely. Aldia shows up, because of course he does. Your whole journey to gather strength has been a curious experiment observed by him, and he shows up to test you in person one last time. You easily defeat his physical form, but I love the detail that you get no souls from him, since he exists on a higher plane. Now, you are ready to make whatever decision you feel is right. You have unshackled yourself of the undead curse through becoming truly great, unlike Aldia, who removed himself from the cycle and transcended his physical form, writing himself into the fabric of the universe as an observer and choosing to merely watch out of curiosity rather than act. You have broken free from the curse while still being human, having only solved the hollowing for yourself. Yet there is still hope. Hope that you, as a true lord, can change things. Throughout my time playing Dark Souls 2, a recurring thought will always come creeping up on me, time and time again. It would first materialize as a question, and then a hesitant answer. Am I having fun? Yeah, I am having fun. Pure euphoric fun, and nothing can beat that feeling. I couldn't tell you exactly why, but I guess that was the whole point of this video, wasn't it? It's a difficult emotion to put into words, but I felt genuinely thrilled and enthralled at times by the game's disparate yet somehow impactful elements. I believe this is where DS2's true beauty lies. The game is often somber and lonely, just like the rest of the trilogy, capturing the comfort of solitude. But there's also a sort of color and warmth to the world and its residents that I feel is unique to Dark Souls 2. From random side quests like leading a pig through Brightstone Cove Sedora to let it eat some mushrooms to get a pickaxe, to journeying into the ancient dragon's memory to witness the aftermath of Gwyn's war and the burnt down arch trees. I cannot overstate the beauty of this marriage of a wider world filled with adventure, together with an obsessive attention to strange, minute detail. Every aspect of this game works together in pure ludonarrative harmony, all coalescing to form a piece of art fueled by a palpable sense of passion. It is the sum of many distinct and purposeful parts, a genuine and joyous expressionist painting where you have to zoom out to really get a feel for. It feels authentic to itself, and it's clearly a game that is proud of its achievements and what it's striving for. Dark Souls 1 felt large in its themes, with the fate of the world hanging in the balance, and you as the chosen undead being the only one fit to reset it. DS3 evolved that same idea and went even bigger, with the Ashen One's grander purpose to become the end-all of a dying universe. Dark Souls 2, on the other hand, decides to size down, presenting a much more intimate and personal tale, essentially boiling down to being the story of just some guy in some place. But it is your story. The journey of the bearer to find purpose and break the curse is so powerful and captivating in its meta desire to give you and your actions throughout the game meaning. This is your journey. You start DS2 lost and unsure, sent off in different directions and drifting through a fading world with no clear desire beyond gaining strength. By the end of the game, you have become arguably the most powerful human to have existed in the world of Dark Souls at this point, donning the crown of Vendrick, becoming the true monarch, and rendering you immune to the undead curse. You had the ultimate goal of breaking the curse, which you have now fulfilled for yourself. But this is only a solution for the one and not for the many, leaving you with one last decision to make. Link the flame and potentially cause the Age of Fire to march on endlessly as you never go hollow, or use your newfound power to venture out into the darkness to find the true cure to the undead curse for all of humanity. Both choices feel justified in their mercy, and both are grey with no guarantees, just as they are in Dark Souls 1 and Dark Souls 3. This time, however, you have earned through power the ability to change things. You have the strength to seek answers in the dark and beyond what is known. So rather than claiming the throne of want and allowing the world to burn on with you as its eternal catalyst, why not choose to leave it vacant, refusing to continue the cycle without first seeking answers to the true nature of humanity, its curiosity and compassion, its darkness and unpredictability. You embrace Vendrick's quiet strength and Aldia's fiery will and step back out into the unknown. You, the bearer of the curse, must now bear a new curse, one that is noble and honorable, to fight against the first sin, a mission that you have chosen to undertake yourself for the sake of others. All the adventure and struggle and strength you've sought to this point, all your purpose you have hammered out of Drang Lake's countless obstacles, all your effort that brought you here has now amounted to this final declaration, to empower you to tread where no one has tread before.
There is no path. Beyond the scope of life, beyond the reach of dawn. What could possibly await us? Insatiably, such as our fate.